Hello, everybody, and welcome to the AutoCall Fire Detection Academy's webcast series. This is a new series of courses that's designed to deepen your understanding of some of the key features and technologies we have within the AutoCall product line, and to deliver a deeper set of knowledge and understanding that you would get out of the normal launch webcasts. The launch webcast series are designed to bring awareness of the products and to help you understand the features, benefits, and applications. But we recognize that once you really get into the product and start selling it, there are going to be other questions that arise that are usually like, can I do this? Can I do that? So what applications can I really do with the product once we begin to apply it? So the idea of this session is to serve as a bridge between the launch presentations, which are at about the 20,000 foot level, and coming to a full-blown multi-day class and a JCI Fire Detection Learning Center. So that's the plan for the program here, and we're going to kick this off today with a discussion of the 4100 ES ESPS power supplies, which is our newest and most advanced intelligent power supply we've ever released. My name is Brian Scheifele, and I'm on the JCI North American Learning and Development team for global fire detection products at Johnson Controls. I'm based out of Westminster, Mass, as is the lead facilitator here today. His name is Dave Govin. So I lead a group of trainers that are responsible to deliver our fire detection training to you either virtually or instructor-led in one of our classrooms. Some of you I may have met when I was on the road. I did a lot of sales application training at one point. So there's several names here in the webcast that I do recognize, and I say hello to you all. So today, hosting the content for you will be my colleague, David Govin. David is a highly experienced senior trainer on the learning and development team. Dave has many years of experience with our product lines in the classroom and from his time in the field. So I'm excited to have Dave here as an expert trainer to present this material and to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. And please feel free to bring any questions you have about the technology, integration, and how this all fits together, and we'll try to play Stump Dave. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Everybody on the session is on mute. The microphones you have are live, so if you unmute yourself and talk, you'll be heard by all the participants, and we'll have you on mute to eliminate any of the background noise. So that's something I can control here pretty easily. I can put you on mute, but I can't unmute your microphone, so that's something only you can do. So the session is also being recorded. So if you have any concerns about your privacy or don't want to be recorded during this session, which will be published later to autocall.com in the product launch webinar section, I'd recommend that you drop off the call now. Also, in terms of questions, what we're going to do today is hold the questions until the end of the session, where we'll open up the floor to you for Q&A. You can ask questions verbally using the microphone, or you can type questions at any time via the chat interface here on Teams. You'll see that in your little control bar. There's a little icon for that. Feel free. Anything you type there will be seen by everybody and will be recorded in the call recording for everyone to see later. So with that, I hope you enjoy the session. I encourage you to ask questions, and I will hand it over to David Govin to begin the session.
Thanks, Brian. Welcome, everybody, to the webcast on our new power supply, the ESPS, and its brother, ESPS XPS. I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully you can all see this. It's a slide deck. So let's get started. This presentation is going to be a blended presentation of sales information and technical information, and we're going to start with the sales information first. So why is it that we decided to engineer this new power supply or new family of power supplies? Well, this slide kind of explains some of that. Previous generation power supplies often required extra cabinets because of the poor, inefficient use of space. We can put many more ESPS power supplies in a bay than prior legacy power supplies. All right, and the power supply is probably 40% of base space is unused in the old product in a lot of cases. And so we had got with our customers to get some feedback with them and ask them what would be important to them on a particular power supply design. And their answers were, we often have cabinets with a lot of unused space because the power supplies were so big. With this new power supply, we estimate maybe at least 50% savings in this space. Okay, so that's a huge advantage. A lot of times the contractors, when they go into a fire alarm room, there's many different contractors who want space in that room. And so space is at a premium. So if we can limit the amount of space we need, we're all going to get along much better. The previous generation power supplies also had a confusing array of models, and we've reduced that now drastically. So the new power supply is half the size of the previous generation. As you can see here, we're showing you an illustration of the new ESPS. Comes with a fan. If you're going to have more than one power supply in a bay, you need a fan in both power supplies, which mounts on the bottom. And these power supplies have an increased power from the previous generation. We start at 9.5 amps, and when we add the fan, we boost that up to 12.7, right? So we can actually have 50.8 amps of power in a bay or in a cabinet. This power supply also has sensing technology so that if you need the 120 volt configuration, when you plug it in, the power supply automatically knows that's the voltage you're using. If 240 is wired into this power supply, then it switches the 240 input. So there's no need to stock two different power supplies. And not only that, but this power supply is 53% less in weight than the predecessors, and that's a cost savings for shipping, which we're going to pass on to you, the consumers. All right, some of this information on this slide is what we've already talked about. And the point I'd like to make about this slide is because we only have one power supply to meet both voltages, that's going to increase the manufacturing efficiency to build them and reduce the local inventory requirements in your offices because you're only stocking one item. The other thing that is an advantage is because now the IDNet, the NAC cards, and the IDNet cards are unbundled, we've been able to reduce the number of PIDs when you're ordering these pieces of equipment. So we have new configuration rules for the sales tools. As you can see here, on the right-hand side, we have the Navigator, Selection Navigator, and the 4100 ES configurator. So when you're building a system through these tools, there are new rules for the ESPS. All right, you have to select the right AC power and the right PDM harness. You have to select the right NAC and IDNet cards as well. So here's some of the configuration rules as they apply to building a panel. So you can have a maximum of 4 ESPS power supplies either in a bay or cabinet. You can't exceed 4 ESPS power supplies in a cabinet. If you choose to put them all in one bay, that's fine, but you can't have more than one bay having 4 power supplies. So that's the limit. The power supplies it says includes 2 blocks of spaces. Basically, the 2 blocks of spaces is half the width of the older power supplies, which now we can get more of them in a bay. The power supply ratings are with no loads. So that 50.8 amps is the real number, right? So doing the loading and battery calculations will be much cleaner. Other things to note is that the ES XPS doesn't charge batteries, so be aware of that. In a bay, there's only two ESPS power supplies allowed, and if you did have 2, one of them is a backup, one of them is a primary. So other things to note is that the new conventional NAC cards that mount to these power supplies and ID NAC cards are not compatible with the legacy power supplies. So they must be joined in a system with the ESPS. And the old expansion signal cards and expansion NAC cards are also not compatible with the new NAC cards. The placement rules and specifications for ESPS. The fan option is required when you have more than one power supply. So this is a listing of all the compatible cards that can mount on an ESPS or an ES-XPS. You can see here that we have a BNIC module, ESNet network interface card, dual RS-232 card, MX digital loop, IDNet. The list goes on. 4-point aux relay, 8-point aux relay, conventional ACK, addressable ID NAC card. So there's quite a few compatible cards that can mount directly to an ESPS or an ES-XPS. These cards on this slide are not compatible with mounting to the new family of power supplies. However, these cards are compatible to be mounted somewhere else in the bay. So what are they? Fiber optic modems, DC voltage regulator, audio controllers, fire phones. Any of those cards do not mount directly to these new power supplies. So what about phase in, phase out? Do we still carry the legacy power supplies like the EPS and the SPS? Currently we do, but they are going to be phased out in the near future. Also, the ESPS power supplies are not direct replacements for those items. If you have an EPS in a 4100 system and you want to replace it with an ESPS, you're going to have to plan accordingly, so that, because you might have wiring harnesses that need to be longer than the previous ones or shorter. You might have some other things that you have to plan for. You can't just pull the old one out and put the new one in without some planning. So when it comes to that retrofit situation that I was describing, you are able to order them right now, but keep in mind, in the near future, you won't be able to. So you may need to plan for some of your sites that would require a replacement. Also, the power supply will have the option cards that get mounted to them. They both have their own physical address, right? So when we had we had the EPS in the system, it had one address, but yet you'd have IDNAC on the same card and IDNet in some cases, right? Well, with this power supply, your option cards have their own switch pack for addressing. The other thing that the ESPS and the XPS require is that you're at software revision 501 or higher. So let's say you have a system out there that has 402. You're going to put an ESPS or an ESXPS in that system. You're going to have to upgrade your panels for it to work with the ESPS. Also, the custom control might have to be adjusted because of the new addressing schemes of having two cards. You're probably going to want to talk to a tech, and make sure they know that this could affect their programming at an existing site. So again, the compatibility requirements is that you have a 4100 ES CPU, you're using a 501 programmer or newer, and that your software running in the panel is a 501 or newer. So here's a list of some new part numbers for ordering the equipment. They're broken out into two different categories in this slide. The top category is the new master controller panel. As you can see here, we have, the 2x40 LCD display. Then you have French, the info alarm French, info alarm international, and then no display. On the bottom chart is your controller options. You want a master controller with IDNet. You want a master controller with an MX loop. And then you have part numbers for the harnesses for the different voltages, right? So this is like when you would be ready to place an order and you're working in the new sales tools. These are some of the part numbers that you're going to see. So now we have some new ESNet part numbers as well for when you're trying to build a network system, right? And some examples would be ESNet NDU, 2x40 standard LCD display. You have the French version of that, the info alarm, which is a much larger screen, info alarm French, info alarm international, and so on and so on. There's different configurations that you can order for the network series. So the power supply itself can be ordered by itself as well. So what we were seeing on the previous slides was the panel part numbers. This is like if you wanted to order just the power supply by itself, right? You have an ESPS, the part number is A100 5401, or if you want the ESXPS, it's a 5402 as an example. All right, we have a part number for the harness separately and the fan separately. And then the last two are you can order the conventional NAT card or the addressable ID NAT card separately as well. All right, well, in line with ordering equipment or trying to plan for ordering equipment, you have data sheets, right, that can give you much more information than this 1 hour seminar, most likely, right? We can open up a data sheet and get a lot of detailed information about how these products can be configured and what some of their limitations and capabilities are, right? So what do we show you here for some data sheets? If you were to locate AC 4100 1031, well, that's going to be a data sheet on the ESPS basic panels, right? And then you have emergency voice alarm communication panels, miniplex, NDUs, remote enunciator panels. So what are we saying? Well, data sheets are very important because they give us a lot of information about the product. So it's healthy to pull all the data sheets you think might be important and, start reading them. So where do you find sales support? Well, pre-sales application support. If you don't need an immediate answer, you can always email at the generic email address here, intersaleseng@jci.com. And within a couple of days, you should get some kind of an answer. If you need an immediate support person, we have a phone number, 800-846-7611, and select option 1. They're available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So that's pretty much ending the sales information part of this webcast. And so now I'm going to move on to the technical side. So we're showing you here if you follow the red dot, the red dot I placed on the ESPS power supply. And then when I bring the dot up to the card above it, that would be an IDNAC card to support 3 SLC circuits of addressable AV loops. So this top card would mount to the bottom card. So you'd have a power supply and an IDNAC card mounted to it. The conventional NAC card, where I have the red dot right now, can also plug onto the ES power supply and only take half the footprint of the power supply. So you could really have 2 conventional NAC cards mounted to the power supply as opposed to 1 ID NAC card, because the physical footprint's a little bit bigger on the ID NAC. We're also showing you the fan module here, should you need more than 1 power supply in a bay. So what we like about the product, ESPS, is that it's modular. What does that mean? Well, it means that the NAC cards, the ID NAC cards, the MX loop cards can all be mounted to it. Very flexible, and the option cards that can be mounted to it. Another thing to know is that if you have an audio system and need a flex amp, the ESPS is the power supply that you want to use. The ESXPS does not power up the flex amp. It's not compatible with it. All right, so something to be aware of. So what is the amperage without the fan? It's 9.5 amps. What is it with the fan? 12.7. So when you add the fan, the power supply actually has a built-in feature that supplies the amperage that the fan needs. It's all automatic. And the battery charger also has a temperature compensated charger that has a dual rate charger. So when you're charging smaller batteries like 6.2 amp hours on through 20 amp hours, it's providing 1.3 amps as opposed to larger batteries, which it actually switches to the higher rate. So what's the size and weight of these power supplies? Well, the big news is the ESPS footprint is half the size of a EPS or an SPS, and the weight is 53% lighter. So shipping this around is very cost efficient. The connections that go into this power supply, obviously AC, and like I said before, the voltages are switched automatically internally. All right, the voltage is also based on a specific harness. That's how the power supply kind of recognizes what it should be putting out. Right, it's got a battery connection. We can tie in a city relay card to it. We have a harness for the RUI motherboard circuit. On board, in the center of this power supply, where I'm going to bring the red dot, is where your aux power terminals are in your aux relay, which we'll later show you in a blown-up version. The PDI option connections, that's these white plugs. And this power supply can also be used as a backup power supply. So when you add two ESPSs in the programmer automatically has rules written in there that it knows the first one's the primary and the second one's the backup. It's really nice, good feature. So this is a view of the back of the power supply where it mounts to the chassis. That's what it looks like in back. So this is a configuration where you'd have a primary ESPS power supply on the right here, and then you would have a second ES BPS, which BPS means backup power supply. So if your job specification requires a backup power supply, you would mount them next to each other, and then you would let the programmer take care of it. These two power supplies are connected by a harness. That's how they know when to switch power if one fails. It's through the harnessing. Okay, fully redundant bay for all cards, meaning if you lose one power supply, the other power supply is guaranteed to keep the system running. So both simple NAC and aux power and aux relays are independent. What we're saying here is on the top where this terminal block is, the two terminals on the left are your aux power / simple NAC. So you can program this for what you want it to be. Do you need it to be supervised? Well, then you program it for a simple NAC. Do you want it to just be 24 aux power? Then it won't be supervised. And then these three terminals on the top are for a Form C relay, should you need to control something else. The other thing to be aware of is when you have multiple power supplies in a bay, whether it's a backup or you have an XPS here, they're both going to require the fan. So here is the fan option. And this fan option module, as soon as you plug it in, the power supply knows that it's going to need to boost itself to 12.7 amps to support the fan. And the fan automatically turns on when the system's in alarm. So it has an automatic sensing of when there's an alarm, it turns on to keep everything cool. Also, once every 24 hours, the fan activates to make sure it's online and can spin freely. If it can't spin freely and it's not detected that it's online, you'll get a hardware configuration mismatch trouble. So that's a nice feature as well. This is how they mount to the bottom of the power supplies, which is also another efficient use of space. So in this slide, we're showing you 4 power supplies in one bay, which is a legal configuration. It's listed to work this way. How is that different than what we did before? Well, if you had an EPS or an SPS, you can only have one of those power supplies in a bay. Now we're saying we can put all 4 power supplies in the same bay, gaining 1, more efficient use of space, and 2, we can support a lot more power and circuits in a smaller amount of space. I like to view this as when we had the EPS in a bay, you basically had one 3-circuit ID NAC card. Well, now each one of these ESPSs can have 3 IDNAC circuits on it. So multiply that by 4, and we have 12 IDNAC circuits in one bay. So that's a lot of support for addressable AVs all in one bay. So this is a blown up view of the terminals I was describing earlier on the top of this power supply. Here's your aux terminals or simple NAC, and here's your relay terminals. They're rated for 2 amps at 24 volts. And one thing to, be aware of is that if you do program this as a simple NAC, it'll be a reverse polarity NAC, but it does not support synchronized strobes. So just be aware of the application you can use it for, that's all. Okay, and then the Form C relay is rated at 32 volts or 30 volts AC at 2 amps. So the ESPS provides mounting space for 2 blocks. Well, you learn that when you come to class, what a block space is. To sum it up, the EPS required 4 blocks of space, and the ESPS only requires 2 blocks of space, which is half the footprint. I think one of the important things of this ESPS design is the fact that it's a lot smaller with the same amount of power. So some of the incompatible cards, this carries through from the sales presentation of this webcast. These were all listed in the sales side as well, like a fiber optic modem, voltage regulator, audio controllers, Fire Phone. All of these cards are not compatible to plug onto these white plugs directly on the power supply. However, they are cards that are compatible with the 4100, just need to be placed elsewhere. So this is a blown up version of the ESPS with all the connection points and aux power and the relay. This is a city relay card that's also compatible with the ESPS. We generally use these to connect to what we call a master city box, and that city box transmits a signal directly to the fire department. There's not a lot of them in use anymore. I know Boston probably uses them, Boston, Massachusetts. So it is a card that we offer should you need it. And this is an installation document illustration showing how the power supply mounts on the in the bay. So here's some LED. It's an LED chart showing you if this LED is on, what is the trouble or what is the condition, right? So LED number 1 is your AC status. And so if the green light is on, it indicates you have AC power. If it's off, then you have some kind of an AC failure and it's in trouble. LED 2 is really saying that you don't have communication with the CPU, and it's going to be yellow in color. LED 3, one of the 4 conditions probably exists here: earth fault trouble, battery missing trouble, AC fail trouble, power supply overcurrent trouble. So at that point, you're going to have to narrow down, which one of these 4 is actually the condition. You have to do some troubleshooting and process of elimination maybe. LED 4 is saying that you have a situation with your aux power tap or your simple NAC, and one of these 3 conditions could be the condition that's alive, right, and currently causing an open circuit, a short circuit, or an overcurrent. So this slide is showing a switch pack to set an address for the power supply. So each power supply that you put in a system is going to require its own address. as well. Switch 2 up here on the top right, that is for, depending on which switches are on or off, like for earth detection enabled, then you'd set the switches as switch 2 1, switch 2 2, and switch 2 3 to on. And now you're saying, I want this power supply to and have earth detection enabled. If you switch those switches a different way to off, now you're saying you want to disable the earth detection feature. And the reason you would do that if you're turning it off is because you most likely have multiple power supplies in the system, and only one of those power supplies should be set to be the earth detection monitoring equipment. For normal battery operation, you're just going to set the switch to switch 2 4 to on. If you want battery cutout, or what they call battery shutdown, you would switch those switches to switch 2 4 is off. So when switch 2 4 is set to off, the ESPS does not power up from the batteries. AC power is required. So a little more about the charger. I think we had talked about it earlier in this webcast, that you had a dual rate. So the smaller amperage is for the smaller batteries, and the higher amperage is for the larger batteries. It's got a fast flow recharge to full capacity, so it maintains them for a long term. It also has battery and trouble supervision. If the batteries are drawing full current for 3 days, you'll get a battery missing depleted trouble, and then you'll be notified that you should switch your batteries. Also, it can be configured for a backup operation with the harness I described earlier. So it could be a backup battery charger. This chart here is showing different current consumptions that apply to whatever configuration you have. So be aware of the one you have, and then you can refer to this chart for that information. So the nice thing about the IDNAC card is, or I should say the EPS and the IDNAC together, is that under normal condition, the battery voltage is low, so when the system doesn't have an alarm in it, and when it receives an alarm, the voltage gets boosted to 29 volts. And we also guarantee that we're going to give you 29 volts even when the battery voltage goes down to somewhere around 19. So we're really achieving quite a feat to be able to provide 29 volts when we lose AC power and we're on battery backup and the voltage has gone down. So this is more information on, whatever configuration you have. These are your current consumption differences. So one of the things you want to be aware of is there's separate ratings for constant and steady loads. So what's the difference? Well, constant would be you have a steady horn that's on solid, and a pulsing load would be like strobes, right? Aux power could be considered a steady load as well. So we had discussed the different option modules that can get plugged on to the ESPS. A couple main differences is the 4x10 card is the IDNAC card, right? And then the 4x4 5 card was the conventional NAC card. The ID NAC cards cannot be mounted elsewhere in the bay. In other words, you can't just plug them into the bay and not be mounted to an ESPS. It has to be mounted to an ESPS. And none of these, whether it's an ID NAC card or a conventional NAC card, they're not compatible with the legacy power supplies. So some things to be aware of. So this is a blown up version of the ID NAC card. Your ID NAC circuits on the far left here, where I have the red dot, and there's 3 ID NAC circuits per card. As I was saying before, if you had 4 power supplies in a bay, you would have 3 circuits per, so you'd multiply that by 4, you have 12 ID NAC circuits. Each one of those circuits being able to support 127 addressable AVs. That's an awful lot of addressable AVs if you do the math, all in one bay. So the ID NAC cards have LEDs to indicate a trouble of some kind. So if we're looking at this chart here on the left, it's got LED 2, 3, and 4. That's in reference to the channel that has a problem. So what is a channel? A channel is one SLC, and each ID NAC card has 3 of those. So let's just say we had a missing device on channel 1. Well, channel 1 light would be lit. Then we're going to advance to the next slide. And I was saying it was a missing device, right? So this LED would also be lit. So it would be LED 7, and LED 2 would be lit, indicating there is a missing device on channel 1. And that's how you interpret the LEDs to tell you, identify what the problem is. Now, some might say, why do I need LEDs when I can read what's on the panel display? Doesn't that tell me the trouble? You might not always have a display on a cabinet. This could be a transponder with an ID NAC card in it. You have no display, so now we have LEDs to give us some information. Okay, we also have a scroll button so that is it possible that you could have more than one trouble? Maybe you have a short circuit and maybe you have a wrong device, or any combination of these could be lit at one time. How would you know it? You wouldn't know it until you press the scroll button to see if there are additional troubles. So I recommend if any lights are on, push the button and see if it advances to a different trouble. Okay, so here's a blown up version of the conventional NAC card, which has 3 circuits on it. These can be configured as Class A or Class B right on the card. We also can program from the panel what the end-of-line resistor is out in the field. I find that's a very great feature. Okay, so here's the conventional NAC card ratings. Again, it's based on do you have a steady output or is it a non-pulsing? I'm sorry, a non-pulsing or a pulsing? Is it regulated? Okay, so this NAC card also has trouble LEDs to indicate, you know, a problem that you might be having. All right, if the COM light's lit, it means that the card's not talking to the CPU. What would the problem be? Well, you'd have to narrow it down. Is the address switch set right? Is it plugged in, you know, seated properly? There's a host of things that you would look at to see why you have a COM trouble. So if one of the NAC lights or LEDs are lit, NAC 1, NAC 2, NAC 3, that just means NAC 1 has a problem, or NAC 2 or NAC 3 has a problem. What's the problem? Well, it could be there's an overcurrent, a short, an open, any one of those. So this is a blown up version of the address switch pack where you would set the address for the card. All right, and then the new ESPS hardware also has new diagnostic sensing for reporting different troubles. It's more robust now. It can report a lot more than before. So some of these things would be, oh, it detects that the fan's missing, or it failed. It didn't run in my 24-hour test. It might tell you that the backup power harness is not in place. It might tell you that you have a power supply ripple voltage, which can cause a host of problems. And it also supports an advanced ground fault detection. So what should you be concerned with when you're doing a retrofit with this new line of power supplies? It's not a drop-in replacement. Again, we had said earlier in the webcast that you're going to want to plan if you have to, bless you, if you have to replace an EPS with an ESPS, reach out and, you know, or go to the site and see what might be needed to get this full retrofit done, right? Because recall, if you have an EPS, it only has one address. When you put in an ESPS with an IDNAC card, now you're going to have two addresses. So you have to consider what needs to be adjusted to have that fit into your existing site. The other thing to remember is that the ESPS or the ESXPS requires a minimum that the panel be at version 5.01 or higher. So your system might need an upgrade for you to add the ESPS. And there may be situations where your custom control is going to be affected, and you're going to have to adjust that as well. So again, what are the compatibility requirements? Well, you need a 4100 ES CPU. You need a master rev at 501 or newer, and you need to be using a 501 programmer. Here's some of the new service parts. So the ESPS control card has a new part number. The ESXPS does, and then some of the harnessing. We also have some more new technical documentation available. Install guide, the conventional NAC install guide, the IDNAC install guide, the fan option module, and the power supply service part replacement number, as well as an installation job aid. So how do you get tech support? We have the email address. If you can wait, you know, it's not an immediate need, you can send an email to intertechsupport@jci.com. And if it's an immediate situation, you would call the phone number at 800-846-7611 and select option 2. And they're available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So we're going to stop now to see if maybe anyone has questions. A good place to put them is in the chat. Maybe there's some already there we can investigate. And it's possible we could unmute your mic and you could do a live question. So does anybody have any questions?
Jeremy has a question. Jeremy's asking if we can get a copy of this presentation, and the answer is yes.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. Of course.
Yep. Anyone else?
Oh, did you want to know how? Oh,
okay. Yeah, how are we going to do that?
Okay, so Jeremy and everybody on the call, you can find on autocall.com, if you go to the resources section, you would be able to, where it says keyword, all you have to do is put in PPT. That's the extension for PowerPoint. And you'll see several launch and product PowerPoints that are there. So this PowerPoint that we just delivered to you today is comprises of two of those, the product introduction and the product hardware. So both of those are up there. Feel free to use those as you normally would. And thanks for asking the question. That's great. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question using a microphone? If you do, please go ahead and utilizing your mouse, go ahead and unmute your microphone and go ahead and ask your question.
For the 12 amps on the power supply when it has the fan, is that extra 4 amps, is that for the fan only, or does that allow you to have more amperage for your circuit?
Hold on.
Yep. Stand by 1 second. We're trying to get the speaker on here. I heard that you were talking. Hang on just 1 second. We'll have you repeat that question if that's okay. Just a second.
1 second.
Turn your speaker on.
Yeah, I couldn't get to it. Okay, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that, please?
You bet. The extra amperage when you add the fan, is that usable current, or is that strictly reserved for the fan?
No, it's reserved for the fan only.
Okay, so thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thanks, Dominic, for the question. Anybody else? Don't be shy.
Well, great. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we could end this call. And I would like to thank everybody for coming. And I would like to say one last thing, and that is recently we have switched over to a new LMS. So your dealer has been issued instructions on how to get your account set up for that new LMS. And so there is some action required on the behalf of the dealer. So if you could take a look at that emails that were sent out by our coordinator here in Westminster. Her name is Lori Guy, and respond to that so we can get your accounts switched over to a new LMS that we're using on what's called a Meridian platform. So we're really excited about that rollout, and so please do that. And if for some reason you can't find it or you need more information, you can easily email me. Everybody here on the call has my email address because I sent out the message invitation. Or they could contact their AutoCall sales rep and then get back to me that way as well. So I would like to thank you all for coming today, and we hope you have a safe and healthy future here, and have a wonderful weekend. And thanks to everybody for coming.